Okay, now that I've got all those doomer feelings out of my system with the last video, back to normal content. Thanks for indulging me with that one, friends. While I meant every word of it, I don't actually think things are that bad yet. But I do feel a lot better having kind of explicitly charted out my plans should everything end up moving that way. Moving on. A while back, when I was talking about my position on $80 price points, I mentioned that it's just more concise for me to say absolutely not to $80 games, not because there is actually zero circumstance whatsoever in which I would buy an $80 game, but because the games that could potentially get me to shell out that amount are so unlikely to be thought of as viable candidates for it by their own publishers that it might as well be that absolute. I said it then, and I'll say it now, it's one of the perks of having niche tastes. Almost as fast as the video went up, one of my friends got into my DMs guessing correctly that one of the games I was talking about was Wave Race. Wave Race in general, and Wave Race 64 in particular, is near and dear to my heart. Wave Race 64 is the solitary game that kept me from selling off my Nintendo 64 altogether when Nintendo had otherwise completely fallen out of favor with me in the late 90s. It's the one game that makes me spare the N64 whenever I see one of those "one of these consoles must go" memes. It is the game that caused the presence of Wave Race Blue Storm to force me to buy a GameCube on launch when everything else about the system was completely unappealing to me. Of course, Wave Race 64, through brilliant arrangements courtesy of Thaddeus Silva, to whom I am eternally grateful, go give him a follow and check out his other stuff, comprises a good chunk of this channel's background music. Before we really had established standardized pricing in video games, Wave Race 64 is the game that got me to cross the original $80 barrier when I picked up my copy, thanks to store credit, at the premium of $87.99 when I was just 15 years old. So, if Nintendo dropped Wave Race 4 at a future Nintendo Direct, it stands to reason that I would be there day and date with my $80 to hand them, right? Well, not so fast. Even at $60 or $70 I would have some questions, and I've really spent the last 20 years and change wondering if Nintendo even understands the appeal of Wave Race at all. Let's talk about it here. This is Little Akiba Games. I'm Patrick. Welcome back to the shop. So what can I say about Wave Race 64 that I haven't already said in either past content or even in this very video? It's one of my favorite games of all time. It made me a true believer in analog controls, which are one of the main things it was made to sell. I've put hundreds, if not thousands, of hours into this classic that was probably made with only tens of them in mind. When accounting for physics, the water in Wave Race 64 is still impressive when held up against games of today, including the recently released Mario Kart World. It's a masterwork of "I wish I could be there" visuals. That isn't praise that I heap on just any old game to come along. You really have to create something special to get me to say that. If Kazumi Totaka's soundtrack was anything short of monumental to me, I wouldn't be using it to define so much of the sound of this channel. Long before I started sounding off on YouTube, this channel was home to my first perfect recorded Wave Race 64 expert run in a sea of Ridge Racer 2 and Kamen Rider Generation 2 footage, captured from the Wii Virtual Console version of the game. That session wasn't intended to be anything special. Compared to what I've seen other players do, it certainly isn't. I had just started getting in the habit of pressing the record button on my capture card at random times while gaming, and I happened to have a really good run. The decision to play Wave Race 64 that morning was just a random whim, one that still comes to me every now and again, coming up on 30 years after the game's release. I have literally played it for about 2/3 of my life. Wave Race 64 was simply the perfect game for the perfect time. When genuine 3D gaming was still very novel, and Nintendo had just introduced the console market to the concept of analog sticks, Wave Race 64 was a showcase title for both. Thanks to the N64 controller, guiding your watercraft around was more intuitive than anyone could have imagined at the time, demanding and facilitating access to light, subtle motions in concert with wide-sweeping turns. It worked perfectly with the water physics to produce a timeless feel, and unfortunate realities of NSO aside, I'm glad that it's still available in some form for new generations of players to experience. In contrast, Wave Race Blue Storm was quite different. Handed off to Nintendo Software Technologies from the original team at EAD, it was built to be a showcase of the GameCube's more powerful hardware, not accounting at all for why Wave Race 64 was so great. It was still a fun racing game with plenty of challenge and no shortage of visual showcases, as NST certainly had a cohesive vision for the IP, but the chill vibes of riding the waves and controlling your watercraft with laser precision had given way to a struggle for survival, fighting the sheer power of both your ride and of nature itself for control of your path around the track, giving you the feeling of hanging on for dear life the entire way. It was probably very exciting for those who were looking for that kind of experience, but the design of Wave Race 64 was nowhere in the equation. Even the soundtrack offered up generic forgettable rock tracks in place of Totaka's masterpiece from 5 years prior. Now, even saying all this, I don't dislike Wave Race Blue Storm, let me be clear on that. I can still go back and enjoy it even now. However, what I dislike is how badly it missed the mark by going its own way rather than using the previous title as a guiding principle. I understand how it all came together. EAD was kind of preoccupied at the moment and probably just wasn't available to take on a new Wave Race title on top of everything else they had cooking at the time. It just really didn't follow up right, either because the team at NST decided they didn't need to showcase analog controls and water physics so much anymore, or because they didn't get the point of Wave Race 64 in the first place. Considering this is the team that was fresh off of Ridge Racer 64 when they went into this project, you could convince me of either. The point I'm trying to make is, in 2025, I don't have a clue what mindset a studio would bring into a new Wave Race project. I can completely see why a developer would want to revisit the man versus machine versus nature concept that Blue Storm presented, but it's not something I'd pay $60 or $70 for, let alone $80. I'm also cynical enough to imagine that that's the direction they'd want to go from a marketing standpoint. That sort of thing looks damn cool in the trailer and on the box. However, I also don't see Nintendo looking at a new Wave Race title of any particular design philosophy and thinking, yes, there's our next killer app. That is an $80 game. People might complain again, but you and I both know they'll pay it. Yeah, that isn't happening with Wave Race. The types of games that I enjoy the most just aren't the types of games that inspire that way of thinking, and honestly, I'm happy about that. But what about all of you? What, if anything, do you see Nintendo doing with Wave Race on the Switch 2, apart from inevitably including Blue Storm in the NSO GameCube app at some point? Do you think there's even an appetite to bring the IP back at all, or is Nintendo content to just sit back and let Mario Kart represent the totality of their racing genre presence? Let me know down in the comments, and hopefully the enthusiasm for this series in general isn't just mine. That's all for now. Just wanted to put a quicker, lighter video out there after the heavier stuff being discussed of late because I really feel like a palate cleanser was in order. If you like this video, then please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Click the notification bell with the all option to know right away when the next video drops, and really do this with all of your favorite channels, regardless of whether or not mine is one of them. Mike Odyssey, Nintendo YouTuber, all-around good dude, and actually the reason I started wording my outro like this in the first place, is going through some nightmarish channel sabotage right now, and that notification bell is a fantastic way to back your favorite channels, if and when things like that happen. Stay strong there, Mike. For what it's worth, you've got the support of this relative nobody. With all of that having been said, I hope to see you all back here next time at Little Akiba Games.